As this channel has grown, a lot of people have been asking for more help with episode 4, and I wanted to address that by giving you a drawing. I've done this before, and also giving you written instructions for how to wire between your stepper motor drivers and your Arduino. And also for those that have been with the series for a while, I just wanted to give you a simplified version of hooking up your limit switches. First thing first, let's deal with revisiting episode 4. A couple of questions came up from different viewers, and that is, first of all, what's the little hat that I put on top of the Arduino? And what that did is it just put pins down inside the pins of the Arduino and made it so that we had screw terminals to each one of those pins. So when I call you to put in a wire in a certain pin of the Arduino, screwing it into that just fixes the wire more securely so we don't have to solder. So if that confused you, it just makes things more secure. And now I'm going to show you the different wiring setups with written out directions. Here's the X motor driver wired to the Arduino. Here's the Y motor driver wired to the Arduino. And here's the Z motor driver wired to the Arduino. If you watched the last video, you learned the difference between a normally open and a normally closed switch on your limit switch. And I wanted to show you a very, very quick way so that you can wire up your limit switches on your CNC. This is going to be using the normally open configuration, and it's going to be using only shielded cable for the wiring. There is ways to reduce signal noise with other means, but for relatively small CNC machines, shielded cable usually will do the job for you. So this is just a super quick overview to get you going. Each of your axes typically will have 2 limit switches associated with them. And so for the X axis limit switches, we're always going to wire both of those to pin number 9, and that will be hooked to the normally open switch. And then the common switches on both of them will be wired together and taken back to a ground on the Arduino. For limit switches for the Y-axis, both of those will be wired to pin number 10, hooking together the normally open switch between the 2 limit switches. And then the common on each of those 2 Y limit switches will be wired together and hooked back to a ground on the Arduino. And then finally for the Z, that the normally open switches are going to be wired together for the 2 limit switches and then taken back to pin 12. And then finally the common on both of the Z limit switches will be wired together and taken back to the ground. Sounds complicated, but I'll just show you. This is a simplified drawing showing you the X limit switches, the Y limit switches, and the Z limit switches. And this is just a Arduino. And of course, on the real one, we would have our screw terminals, and these would be the numbers of the screw terminals that we put the wires in. But I just want to show you visually how to wire these things together. If you watched my last video, I went into great detail about the difference between an open and a closed and the common. And if you watched it, specifically where this lever comes in on my limit switch, that side has to be the common. So there's the common, there's the common, there's the common. It's where it comes in at. And so all of these commons ultimately will get wired to a ground. And then for the X, if you recall, we're going to wire that to these opens, which is going to be on this particular brand that I had, the middle switch. Now that's why I went to the great detail of the last video, is because depending on what your manufacturer, you're going to have different pins here for exactly which one is the open and which one's the common. And so just so you can visually see this, it would look something like this. And of course you would have to do this with shielded cable because these limit switches are very susceptible to electromagnetic interference. So for pin number 9, which is my X-axis, I would take a wire and I would come over here and I hook it to that open, because we're doing normally open, which is the setup that I'm giving you. And then you would just take this wire over to that middle pin of that one. And then these two you would hook together with the ground wire. So I'm going to use green for ground and come, and that's not hooked into the blue wire there. It would come in here, hook to this, and then it would come around and hook to the ground. Now let me show you what would happen with the Y. The Y goes to pin number 10, so I'm going to use a black marker for that. And once again, we're going to the open switch. On this brand, it was the middle pin here of the limit switch, and then I just hook it to that. And that takes care of the 10, and then we have to hook the common up to ground again. So this gets to be kind of a maze, but I'm not hooking into these other wires. These are just, the green's just hopping over them. So I'm going to here, and then I'm going to come around and hook into that ground. And then finally, my last, which was my Z limit switches here, they're going to be on pin number 12, and pin number 12, we're going to go ahead and hook those up, and once again we're going to the open, and so we're going to hook that, and we're going to wire it into that, and then the commons we're going to have to put back to the ground. So we're going to wire these two together and then take that wire on across to the ground. If you want to save a little bit of wiring, you can hook all these commons on all of these together if it works with your particular CNC. But that's essentially the game you're going to play. Make sure you use shielded cable, and most CNCs that are relatively small, and if you don't have a lot of EMI going on in your garage, you can probably get away with just a shielded cable. There's better ways to do this, and I'll show you that in another video where you use capacitors and resistors. So hope that's helpful. You'll have to turn it into the next video if you want to find out how to reconfigure your firmware. My dog's yawning in the background. Reconfigure your firmware to utilize these, but essentially it's just a couple settings. I'll put in the description what the settings are, just so that if you want to get started and give this a try, and then you can just use a jog shuttle of your gSender controller to see whether or not when you push these switches it cancels it.